I'm happy to see you all convened to continue our effort, and we're not going to, and we'll continue right now without further ado. If you know about the changes in the program, then you will realize that the first lecture of today's morning will be the lecture of Eivind Smith, our expert from Norway. He is a professor, a lawyer. He's a member of the Norwegian Academy of Sciences. So the subject matter is on the program, and I think that Mr. Smith will certainly add a few words before we continue, because we just met a few minutes ago, and I cannot give you any more information about our expert and our friend, but I can only tell you that that our school has always been relying on the support of our colleagues from Norway, very wide support from our colleagues from Norway, and Norwegian expertise at the seminars and the forum that our school organized this year in Norway. All this has been a very important contribution in our enlightenment effort, and we value this effort very much, and so owing to the presence of our Norwegian experts, so we have a chance now to thank our Norwegian experts for that. I don't want to waste any more time and give the mic over to our Norwegian expert. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry that I will have to speak in English, which is not my language and not your language. The interpreters have got a sketch of the main themes of my intervention. I hope that will be to some help for them in their heavy task. I was first of all invited to talk about myself. It's not that much that need to be said. I think I am from Norway. That gives one out of many reasons to express my gratitude for being invited. First of all, I was invited some time ago and could not come on an earlier occasion. I'm very happy to be here now. I would really sincerely like to say that I thought it became much more important to come now than I thought it would be half a year ago, due to precisely the international development that is very little sympathetic. I'm concerned about it. I've observe what was discussed a little bit last night during the last intervention, this tendency of the, so to say, the two sides speaking badly of the others in a way that I really dislike. And in such times, we should really, even more than ever, try to speak together. Being a Norwegian, I would even like to add that, yes, we certainly were a part in the Cold War. I do not think Russians seen from Norway were as ugly as they may have been seen from the United Kingdom, as John Lloyd explained yesterday, quite simply because Norway has never had a hot war with Russia. We have always had nice, friendly, somewhat cold, but always peaceful contacts up in the north. And I would even like to recall, because it's very recently we had another anniversary, the 70th anniversary of 1944, that the Red Army liberated northern Norway and then withdrew. So that is really a very important part of our history, and I think of your history. So again, I'm very happy to be here. I'm, so to say, a professor of public law, constitutional law, with a large interest in comparative law. But I'm not only, I would say, a lawyer. I will insist on speaking to you a little bit about law. But not because I think law is everything, I think law becomes important, interesting, if we are aware of the need for interaction between legal frameworks for social activities, interaction between law and life, so to say. And when it comes to media law, to access to information, this is of course vital. The world is full of nice legal formula. Not all of them are observed, but if you know about them, they may at least form an excellent starting point for arguing about the good thing, so to say. Talking about history, some of you, some of us still remember what was called the Helsinki process before the fall of the Soviet Union, where a very nice document was elaborated and agreed upon by all the participating powers. That document was not the truth about what happened, but it was used at a standing point for arguing about the document becoming the truth, so to say. I think that was important in itself, and probably a nice illustration of what law may be used for. Now, I'm supposed to speak about what I call uncovering the public sector. Public sector, of course, at many levels. I mean, state, central government, regions, municipalities, etc. You have many of them in this country. In a sense, I would like to cover it all. I think we all agree that the way the public sector works is vital for the good society. Then it becomes vital for the good society for us others to know about what's going on there and being able to look after what's going on or not going on the way they are taking care of our common interests. And I thought I could do that in 3 times. First, speaking a little bit about the freedom of expression of public of civil servants, of public employees, so to say. Then speaking a little bit about press secretaries and information agencies of any kind. There are many of them nowadays. And finally, and maybe most importantly, speaking about the right to access to public files, to public information, not only through leaks of a more or less important kind, but even the legal right to access to public files. By doing so, I invite you to have from time to time a look at the small text I gave out to most of you, I hope, copying an article from the Constitution of Norway. It is not meant as a model, even if I basically wrote it myself once upon a time. It's meant really as an example that I tend to think is summing up some of the important elements in a nice way, insisting on the interaction between these different elements of our subject matter. So just to be used as an example, nothing more than that. Then first, again, I talk about in the sense of the ideal world. I know very well that ideals are not always carried out in this society, in my society. There are challenges everywhere. It will never stop. I have come to learn about that, as well as chairman of a number of inquiry commissions in Norway, and really, I mean, they had the opportunity to get further into public files than the press, than the outside could normally do. It's very, very intriguing to see, I mean, how these factors interact. When it comes first to freedom of expression for public servants, it's of course just one element, but I would say a key element of the freedom of expression for everyone, for everybody. It's spelled out in the small constitutional text in the second paragraph about how can freedom of expression be justified. Answer, yes, on the seeking of truth, the promotion of democracy, of course, and the individual's freedom to form opinions and to spread them, even if that is not important for democracy in the strictly political sense. And I think it's important to insist that public servants as well are covered by this freedom of expressions. First of all, most basically, most evidently, public servants are individuals. They are human beings, like everybody else. They are members of society with a share of the common responsibility of all of us for taking care of our societies. Then I think there are a number of arguments that are likely to strengthen the argument in favor of an extended freedom of expression for public servants. And those arguments include the fact that many public servants are educated people, then for that reason itself with more knowledge than maybe the average member of society. As public servants, many of them will have huge knowledge individually or as a group about important matters to most of us, from sector to sector, certainly, but they are actually dealing with important elements of our common interests. And for such reasons, the participation of public servants in the public debate is badly needed. In their own interest as individuals, of course, but even more in the interest of the society or of the, why not speak about the common good. And I would even like to say that if the freedom of expression is a right, a freedom for everybody among us, the freedom of expression of civil servants should be conceived upon even as a freedom, or rather almost an obligation, quite simply because they are in the center of many important common matters, and they are not speaking on behalf of the boss, of the minister, or the president, whatever. They are, in the sense, speaking on behalf of the democratic community that they are supposed to serve. And I think there are many examples that public servants speaking freely, openly, or maybe more frequently by leaking info, not the Snowden way, but more on individual issues, provides important contributions to creating or upholding good governance, and of course even of making known or uncovered elements of possible or real corruption in the society. Thus, this freedom provides important elements in the open or transparent society. At the same time, this freedom is certainly not always used as I think they should be. Probably that is the case in this society. I know it is the case in Norway. Public servants tend to remain silent, even if they have the freedom to speak. So this freedom should not be the only way to get to know what happens in the public sector. It certainly will have to be considered in conjunction, in combination with other elements, like the two others I'm going to address a few words about just now. There are, of course, limits, I should say, to the freedom of speech of public servants, not only factual elements by fear or whatever. There are even legitimate limits to what they could possibly say. we should distinguish then between internal freedom of expression, for the freedom to speak within the services, to colleagues, to chiefs, etc., and external freedom to speak to us others. When it comes to the internal freedom, there are no reason why it should not be very, very, very wide. It should be possible for a civil servant to speak without undue fear of negative sanctions, destroyed career, and things like that. And it should be understood, it's not always understood, I know that, but it should be understood that having public servants speaking freely to their superiors in the system is really in the best interest of the superior. A superior, a minister, a chief of any kind is not in the long run served by being surrounded by people saying yes. They are much better served by people saying no, and why no, when that is a better solution. I don't need to go further into that, but I think it's very, very easy to say that even a minister, him or herself, in the long run, is much better served, even towards the great society, if counter-arguments are known in time better than afterwards, when you see bad results. So this is clearly in the society's interest. I leave it like that. Then when it comes to the external freedom of expression of civil servants, of public agents, the point of departure is exactly the same as I have already said. Yes, they have the same freedom of expression as anybody else. Again, there are certainly some limits, some legitimate limits. Some are linked to the idea in most societies that the apparatus, so to say, the administrative apparatus, should be ready to serve different political leaders. When you have political elections, one of the points is that you could have somebody new coming in and some old getting out. You may even have changes on sensitive posts without changing the government. Then it's vital for the society that the services are able to serve even people with opposite opinions about important matters in society. So that's the reason why a public servant should not be too eager to speak on behalf of the sitting minister or against him or her, because it might be better having a lower profile for that reason. And then, of course, you have all the considerations about sensitive posts. I mean, if an ambassador doesn't like President Putin, he shouldn't say that in London, perhaps, rather at home. Everybody understands that. That would be the same in Norway. Of course, you have military concern, you have security concern, as discussed by John Lloyd yesterday night. You have the idea that those civil servants working the most closely with the political leadership are not as free to speak as others. I mean, you could not possibly have the head of office contradicting you in the press from day to day. Then the people concerned had rather to change post. And of course, if you are speaking in the name of the government, in the name of the relevant body, in the name of the minister, you do not have your individual freedom to speak. What remains then is, first of all, that the point of departure remains, as it said in the small constitutional text I brought with you, that everyone shall be free to speak his mind frankly on the administration of the state. That was a text that was adopted back in 1814 and still kept in the constitution, and reflecting an important idea in this respect. That applies in any case, to those speaking in their own name and not in the name of the services. And even more, it applies at least to people not speaking about what they are actually dealing with in the service of a minister or a mayor or whatever, a governor, but what when they get into other matters of relevance to the state, but not matters directly under their own responsibility. So a servant in the Ministry of Defense could speak about the safeguarding of natural resources, for instance, which is not directly linked, etc., etc. That is a minimum, so to say. And again, I would like to stress the idea that a public servant is not, first of all, a servant of the relevant minister or governor or whatever. He or she is, first of all, the servant of society, of democracy, so to say, of us all. So that's the first point. The second point is about, you could talk about information agencies, of spokespersons, producing press releases, taking part in press conferences, actively giving out informations and opinions about what goes on in the public sector. You should always keep in mind, and certainly you do, that such people, and there are many of them nowadays in all our societies, they will always speak on behalf of the relevant body, of the minister, of the government, of the president, whatever. That's it, perfectly legitimate, nothing wrong in that. And it's even useful, at least possibly useful, for many reasons. It may, and sometimes certainly will, add to the public knowledge of matters that are presumably important for society. It's useful because it's important for all of us, for the society, for the media, etc., to know how important people think about important matters, or at least how they justify their opinions or choices. And it's useful, or that it may be useful, even because it may then facilitate the outsiders' access to experts or to files that may illuminate further what is said or what is going on. But I think at the same time we all know that a press communique or a press release or what's said at press conferences may be untrustworthy, sometimes even dangerous, in times of war, of course, but not only. Again, first of all, because such texts, such people are always acting on behalf of key persons, key actors, in the interest of the key actors, which is not wrong, but should not be standing alone. It may be dangerous, or at least untrustworthy, because what is produced, what is willingly presented to the public sphere is almost always a selective approach. If not direct lies, at least, I mean, you select what you want to say and try to get around what you don't want to say. And it's dangerous, or at least worthy of skepticism, because it may monopolize the public truth, so to say, from around what is said from the inside of the system out to society. And this is important, I think, in a context where media people are many, even when it comes to the resources of media, because it's easy to reproduce what is said during a press release, to copy, to mirror, so to say, not the society, not the truth, but the press release and bringing it further. And sometimes I think press should do it more because it's useful, it's important as well. But it's very, very important to take into account that the media shouldn't stop there. They should try to achieve what, again, John Lloyd yesterday night called the truth, at least a part of the truth, and the truth may not necessarily be, and certainly not the whole truth, in the press release. Then you put it there and you look further into the matter. The third point in my introduction would then be about what I call the legal right to access to information, to public files, to public documents on paper, which is a traditional way, but more and more even on informatized, digital knowledge, which becomes overwhelmingly important in all our societies. And I think this should be regarded as a most important element to supplement the two first elements, which is the freedom of speech for public servants and the valuable but not necessary action of press releases and press secretaries and all that. And I already said and repeat that leaks are important on a huge magnitude like the Snowden affair, but leaks are important even on a smaller affair. But leaks may even be selective, and very often are. So even for that reason, it's important that we others, and first of all the press, may accede to a broader sources of information. So if the inside, so to say, of the public sector remain silent, if the inside provides incomplete or even misleading information, and first of all, that covers the others in a sense, in case of distrust in what is said from the inside, and you should always keep that distrust vivid, then you need access to something else, to more, in order to establish at least a small part of the big truth. Then you have the right to access to public files, not because the government give it to you, but because you could seek for it on your own initiative, which is sometimes disturbing for the system, but extremely important for the possibility of drawing up a more trustworthy picture of the entire system. Now, when it comes to law, and certainly to practice, we observe huge differences, great varieties between different countries in Europe. One tendency would be that Northern Europe, Scandinavia, maybe first of all, and Sweden, with their strong tradition in publicity for public files, 1766, things like that, they're very proud of that. North tend to be more open than southern countries. And the EU is somewhere in between. They are struggling for more openness, but at the same time the system is so huge that it's not easily accessible nevertheless. And when I talk about outsiders, I mean those not inside the system, I mean it literally, I mean everybody outside, but the fact is that many of us as individuals have no interest, or at least no possibility, in spending hours and days seeking for documents. So then the media ought to have an important role precisely in mediation, looking for information inside, bringing relevant information to the outside. The point of departure then is, according to the text, you have the fifth paragraph that might be worthwhile for just a small look. the point of departure is, or at least should be, this one, that everyone has the right of access to documents of the state and municipal administration, and the right to follow the proceedings of the courts and democratically elected bodies. That is a point of departure. It should be at least a point of departure. Then, of course, even here we encounter limits, not only de facto limits, resistance and inabilities and lack of resources, etc., but even some legitimate limits that may be imposed upon the right of access to public files. One evident example is linked to the protection of the privacy of others, that I should not necessarily have the right to know everything about my neighbor through public files. You have concerns, again, I'm sorry to say so, but that's a fact, regarding security, concern regarding the need for undisrupted internal considerations. The government should have some freedom to discuss internally before coming out and presenting the decision. You have the need for sometimes protecting commercial negotiations and so on. I will not go further into the exact details at such points. The other way around, we know that in all our societies we have had large amounts of privatization. I mean, what used to be public activities now to a large extent are organized in a different form as public owned or even completely privatized huge companies, sometimes with close to a monopoly on vital activities in society. Then it is vital that the simple fact that you reorganize the activity from the public sector as such to one company form or another ends up in closing completely the access to the files. That's why the Norwegian legislation in principle says that, well, and the principle apply even to public owned companies and things like that. But then, of course, the need for having commercial negotiations in secret, so to say, becomes much more important than within the public sector itself. Then, in order to make the right to access operational, there are many remedies that ought to be brought into movement, to be used. First of all, I think the opening up of registers to data files in order to facilitate the access of the media to registers, for them again to identify cases behind the registers that might be of interest to the public, for disclosing more about the truth than the government is willing to say, and things like that. And this is certainly an important task, an important job. The problem, I would say, for many media institutions still is that it demands huge amounts of resources, of people, of technical equipment and things like that. And one of the reasons why that is needed is that if you have an overwhelming amount of information that you can accede to, then you must make the selection. And in order to select, you really have to work on the files in order to know what is important or not, and that is extremely demanding. And I think I could say, and we got the chief editor of Norway here, a former chief editor, that she might confirm that that job has not always been carried out in the way that would have been ideal to the society, so to say. So when such files are used, it is sometimes because a journalist on his or her own gets into a sector and looks for interesting matters, but I think it's much more frequent than when they do so. It's because they have received a leak or a rumor from someone from the inside that disliked, for instance, a decision or a practice, and uses that leak for searching further as a key to looking for information. That's less heroic, perhaps, but very useful as well. And then, of course, I mean, you have the need for possibilities of making recourse, administrative or judicial, in cases you are denied access to a file that you think should be open and things like that. There are many things to be said about that. Those are just a few elements. Then sometimes people would say that there is huge possibilities for such a system to being misused. Many people would say, sometimes I would say myself, that media is a nuisance. Sometimes very unpleasant. Why the hell should we have it, so to say? And there are many good reasons for saying that media is a nuisance, and even should be a nuisance. One is that it is not always trustworthy. What we read, what we on the net or wherever, in well-edited journals and more on the net, is certainly not always trustworthy, at least not in the sense that we know all we should have known about the case before we close the paper. There is a tendency in many countries, in many media, that they will insist on what for the overall society must be qualified as minor items. Really, I mean, movie stars, I mean, are sometimes beautiful and etc., but not that important for society. They tell less than the full truth, and they want to sell. They need to sell, and that equilibrium is not always achieved. And maybe we are moving in the wrong direction. It's hard to say. So certainly, yes, media is a nuisance, but the society would be much worse off without the media, with all its nuisances. I think that is important to stress as well. Please consider, for instance, the price to be paid if access to public files was closed due to such ideas about the media as a nuisance. Then good governance, a possibility of using public files for enhancing the ideas of good governance on behalf of the people, of the society, not on behalf of the minister. That would be very, 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 very bad. There is a possibility in the system for trust building. That's true, very evidently so, if the media really makes an effort and comes up with the result that no scandal has been accomplished. The system works well. But I think it's important to see that even when the media comes up with real problems, real scandals, examples of misbehavior, and if those examples of misbehavior are brought to the public place, to the public square, and possibly even sanctioned, in the long run that is good for trust building in society. I believe that would be the case even for this recent US report on torture in CIA institutions, for instance. It came far too late, but now it's there. So together with systems, many other systems, accountancy, audits, reliable statistics, etc., I think we could conclude that in order to uncover, so to say, the public sector, as much transparency as possible is invaluable as a tool in the interest of all of us, in the interest of society. It should be imposed by law but it should be reasonably observed in practice by the public bodies, willing to cope with what is said in the law, and it should actually be used by the media and in general by civil society actors. And now you should know, before I end, that or recall rather, that I, to some extent now, I have been speaking on behalf of an ideal, but I think that is an ideal that is worthwhile keeping up, and maybe the ideal could be used for enhancing such values in all our societies. That is my hope, anyhow. So thanks for your attention so far.
Коллеги, у нас есть время на дискуссию. Я вас приглашаю принять в ней участие. Коллега из Чечни.
We have time for discussion, and so you're very welcome. Kapurga Islaev. I am a blogger, a journalist. Mass media are, in Russia are talking about an initiative of a Russian MP, member of the State Duma, about banning such terms as Islamic terrorism, Islamic fanaticist. Could you share such an initiative on banning such terms? Do you believe that such terms, especially with the religiously unaware people, does this not cause an understanding that Islam equals terrorism in the eyes of those who are not versed in religious matters?
Because I do not know the entire context of that proposal, but I think I recall the discussion from societies I know better. There is something like Islamic terrorism in the world, we know that. But as you put it, there is a risk that if we all the time speak about Islamic terrorism, there is a risk that we think that all Muslims are terrorists. That is something inherent to the Muslim faith, which is visibly not true when we look in many parts of the world. It may even contribute to to hide away, in a sense, the fact that there are other kinds of terrorists as well. We have often had Christian terrorists, and there are certainly terrorists of other kinds around in the world, claiming to belong or to act on behalf of their particular God. So I share the skepticism of that MP in order I think such qualifications should be used with caution. But at the same time, I tend to think, I strongly think even, that it is not for the state, not for the law, to ban particular words, to get into, so to say, historical truth, which is another part of that. So I would prefer, to banning it by law, so to say, I would be hoping for a public debate that increases the awareness of what I think. The fact is that most of the, 5,000 people that John Lloyd referred to, killed by terrorists the last year or something like that, which is an awful number, of course, is basically due to what happens in Iraq, in Syria, in civil war situations, and not due to what happens in Europe or in Asia or whatever. You have other kinds of activists there, but awareness about, take care of what you say. That would be my advice, but avoid banning words by law.
Так, продолжаем. Анна, пожалуйста. Русская планета.
Anna Baydakova from the Russian Planet editorial house. I'm Anna Baydakov. I work in Moscow. This summer we had the pleasure to attend the lecture of your colleague, Mr. Liflet, the former ombudsman of Norway, and he told me that he had an episode in his career when the journalists came to him because one of the officials, state officials, was suspected in the business relationship with some oil companies, and the journalists wanted to have access to some very important documents that the government held with the prosecutor's office, and they could not they were not granted these documents, and there was even a law which banned access to these resources. Do you believe? We had a beautiful quotation from the Norwegian Constitution, which you read. Do you believe that it is possible, or that it is required, to classify state documents which are not related to security and, say, national defense? Do you believe that it is required to classify such documents? And if so, to what extent? What is the measure of such limitation? And my second question, is there any struggle in Norway today between the journalists and, say, the bureaucracy for better and larger access to such files?
I'll take the second question first. The answer is yes. There's, some media, some of the bigger media, have made it from time to time what's called in French cheval de bataille, really, an important part of their activity in challenging the access. Making test cases and complaining about refusals. Some have really got into and did sometimes a wonderful job in having that kind of access to documents that made it possible not to get into each of the files, but to see how the files were treated. Which percentage met a refusal now compared to 10 years ago, for instance, and there is not always a good development, so to say. That is not to say that all the refusals are necessarily unjustified under the law, but there is certainly a struggle on that. Our relatively new act, based upon the constitutional text, which is a beautiful one, of course, but just a point of departure. Our relatively recent act on access to public files will now be evaluated. I will take part in that, and we will have to see a little bit, so to say. But there is a constant struggle, even at local level. When I'm approached by people and by journalists, it's very frequently due to some questions about they have been denied access to something, whether that is legal or not.
Я прошу прощения, я просто хотела уточнить.
I just wanted to make sure. There were two questions, and I wanted to make sure that. Yeah.
Intention of not coming to the first question. I started with the second one, but not for. And not for getting around the first one. So that is my answer to the second question. We are not living in the sky, so to say, but not in hell neither. There is this constant struggle on many of such points, and sometimes the struggle goes. It's important to say about how the law should be understood, but another discussion, which is very legitimate as well, is about the first question, which should be the legal criteria for refusing access to public files. And whether refusal is required, as you put it, according to the translation, is one question. Another question, not exactly the same, is which limits are legitimate. I mean, when there is a need for drawing a limit, I think we accept that. I mean, if I wanted to know everything about you, I think I should ask you rather than to go to some public body and ask them to tell me about you, so to say. Privacy is important. We tend to believe that, even in the time of Facebook. Actually, it's so. The concrete example of the former ombudsman I don't know about. If I understood you well, that journalists wanted the help of the ombudsman to get into a set of files that remained with the prosecution at that time. Wasn't that the case?
Нет, это была переписка.
Now, this was a correspondence, the correspondence between the government with law enforcing bodies. Yeah, the correspondence, exactly right. These were government the documents, yeah.
Then correspondence, okay. Then I suppose that it was not really necessarily a question about having access or not, but about when having access. When the prosecution is working, there may be legitimate reasons not to reveal to the public what's going on, but sooner or later the prosecution will have to conclude either to put the person to court or not doing so, and afterwards the situation may be different, so to say. So I believe it might have been a question about the time, not about an absolute ban on access. And the example about the possibility that a high civil servant has been linked for bad reasons to a petroleum company is an excellent example where we, of course, should have one kind of access. And I would like to add that Norway is a country apparently with a low degree, a comparatively very low degree of corruption. When we have had corruption in Norway that has had the tendency of being linked to the place where the biggest money are to be found, and that's precisely in the petroleum sector. So there are strong reasons to having access, but that should be distinguished from exactly when you have the right to access.
Коллеги, мое уважение к Анне Байдаковой непоколебимо и не вызывает сомнений даже у нее.
My respect for Anna Baydakova is extremely high, but let me say that if you want to clarify something in your question after our experts started to answer, that means that there's something wrong with the way you put your question. So please do not interrupt our esteemed speaker at the time he is giving an answer. Thank you. Kristina Borovkov from Tyumen. Mr. Sonin, the Russian economy, an expert on the Russian economy, spoke interestingly about some parallels between Argentina and Sweden in the stagnation periods. Norway went through a most interesting period of development. What happened in the Norwegian society to orienteer it, to make it such a law-abiding state and to depart from the corruption? Which were these tectonic shifts in the Norwegian society to make this big sweep?
We had its crisis. We had a banking crisis. I happen to know a lot about that because I presided an inquiry commission for the parliament, actually, on the banking crisis some years later. And I was impressed by the way the government handled that banking crisis when Sweden established an interest rate of 500%, things like that. I mean, absolutely impossible for a few days. Norway really managed reasonably well in safeguarding the banks without using public money. That did not help the bank owners. they helped the people having deposited things in their banks, and some of the banks were taken over by the government, and the owners not compensated because from an accountancy point of view, the banks had no value, but they were important for society. So I mean, every crisis like that has to be tackled by ordinary the ordinary system, so to say, and I think they managed surprisingly well in Norway. Then you should even know that Norway was had low unemployment before the crisis. It rose, but not that much. So we passed, I mean, in 2 or 3 years' time, I mean, that was passed, and we continued under very, very nice circumstances. You talk about Teutonic, I mean, in English, that a shift when it comes to corruption. I do not think we had such a shift at that time. I tend to believe that, I mean, under the absolute monarchy, it was a lot of corruption, but the time were different. That's two centuries ago. Then I'm not, certainly not as a lawyer, but I'm an interested person as well. I'm not able to give you one single answer why corruption tend to be, I believe so, to be low, not completely absent, but low in Norway. But I believe there is something about Lutheranism, for instance, a relatively small society, then transparent society. There is even something about this glasnost, so to say, I mean the openness, insisting on an open society, close relations between the leaders and the others. It's not difficult to, at least until Breivik 3 years ago, it is not, and it's still quite easy to find you on the tram with one of the ministers, so to say. I mean, so it's really a small society that, in a sense, wants to stay small and relatively equal. I think that is important, and then much more could be said. But there was not a dramatic shift at that time. We never, in modern times, had that much corruption. But of course, it has always been an awareness of the point. I have good economists, friends, who have explained to me that once you have a society with a low degree of corruption, it is possible to fight corruption. And being relatively successful, you keep it low because it's not accepted by most people. If you have a system with a high degree of corruption, it becomes extremely difficult because more or less everybody is obliged to accept or to play the play, so to say. So my impression, I mean, on the airport, I mean, in the plane, my neighbor in the seat that I had never seen before, he told me that 20 years ago. I mean, the agent inspecting his passport wanted a small amount of money. That has never happened now, as far as I know, at least. So we are on the right way, so to say. But you probably even pay your agents better than you used to do, and that's a part as well. Thank you.
Продолжаем, коллеги. Сударыня у окна, прошу вас.
We continue. Please remember to give your name. Republika Tva, Aladangaro. If the problem of access to information is still so relevant, and moral ethical aspects of it that have to do with professional activity of mass media and civil servants, then probably this is an indicator that legislations in many countries, including in Norway, have not probably focused. There is something imperfect in some ideas. Maybe we should work hard on the legislation, and then we will not have problems with Snowden, Assange, and others.
There's something about
Ну, вот тогда. Ну, в общем...
Well, in general, probably it all has to do that the legislation hasn't been perfectly worked upon. If there is still question that there's some access to information, that there are some moral and ethical aspects about the activity of mass media and civil servants. don't understand, do you?
So in a sense, if I understood you well, you think about the media as a nuisance. The media is not trustworthy. Neither. So of course, then you might think that yes, media may have access to public files, provided they behave well. But I think that is a dangerous idea, because that might make it far too easy for different governments, to close away media from some of the most important issues. Once upon a time, I gave a speech to a Minister of Justice from one African country. I insisted on the constitutional right that has been detailed in legislation of access to public files. And he gave a speech afterwards in response that dealt for a long time with all the details in his constitution about the freedom of speech, including all the limits to freedom of speech. He had no word at all on that, and it was striking that, I mean, yes, you have freedom of speech, provided you do not harm society and things like that. And if such limits should be imposed on the press, that would really destroy the system. Now, it's possible I did not take your point fully, but that is my immediate reactions. Thank you.
Так, Алена.
Well, Alena, please. Vladimir Pozner said, well, Alena, please remember, I'm Alena Lyashina from Gubernia Khabarovsk. Vladimir Pozner said that there are two positions. For example, on the desk of a government official, of a Minister of Defense of the country, an American journalist saw that, say, something that says, a document that the war will start in 2 days. Say, a Russian saw it on the Russian minister's desk, and American. What would they do? Americans say, I would certainly publish it. Okay, I may have stolen it, I may have gotten access to it, I may have made a photo illegally, but I still have to publish it, because our citizens have the right to know. Whereas Russian journalists say, I would never publish it, because I stole it, because I could never prove that. How would the Norwegian journalists behave? Tell me, please. What would the Norwegian do?
Спасибо.
Thank you.
Well, I'm not a journalist. You should ask a journalist in a sense. It's interesting that you, as many people during the discussion last night, referred to the United States, which had a lot of problems with that country, but they even have a high degree of accessibility to public files, and they are willing, to a large extent, to publish it. I think in Norway the answer would be a little bit along the lines that John Lloyd suggested yesterday. I mean, you would have to balance it. If you really think the publication would harm important public interest without adding very much to what the people want to know, it would not be published. But we have many examples that even, I mean, during the Cold War, so to say, I hope we don't get back to that, but during the Cold War, that media published highly sensitive material about, I mean, intelligence installations and things like that, and nothing really happened. The police tried in the beginning, but that's 30 years ago, 40 years ago perhaps, to intervene, but they stopped, basically. So I don't think the situation would be that different from the one you described from the US, but there is the difference, of course, that when New York Times publishes something, the world knows about it. When a Norwegian paper publishes it, the word doesn't matter. So I mean that, in the sense, that makes the Norwegian public sphere more dangerous than the US one.
Так, прошу вас.
Please, Please remember to give your name. Anna Chiripanova from Novgorod. You were speaking about the transparency and openness as a prerequisite of the effective government, and I can't but agree with you here. However, my question is here. In Russia, we have quite open spheres, such as, for example, government procurement, where open registries are maintained. Any citizen can get access, can look it up, see this information and use it. In Russia, we also have quite transparent and open budget. Information about the budget is published, and anybody can look it up, can obtain this information, can analyze it and do whatever. However, we are facing a problem that this openness and transparency do not lead to public involvement and engagement in decision-making. What I mean here is that, according to our legislation, we have an institute which includes discussions on major procurement, public hearings on the budget, but these discussions, they happen with very little attendance by citizens. The problem is that the information is available, it is open. However, it does not lead to public involvement in the process of decision-making. I would like to ask you, how do Norwegians address this question? What are the instruments in Norway to make this public involvement greater, make it more active?
I think that is a very good question. Not saying that the others were not good, of course. The fact is that in all our societies, I mean, the mass of information is overwhelming on important matters and enormous amounts of unimportant matters. So how could we get, or you could get people involved, get the society, so to say, involved? And that's a very hard question. I do not pretend that the Norwegian society is necessarily much more involved than you are, according to your description. I think there is a tendency of more involvement, but basically on local issues and on some particular issues like immigration, asylum seekers, things like that. And if there is a huge involvement, that is partly, of course, due to the press, but the press is very active in some of these fields because there is a huge public demand. And the public demand is channeled through what we call civil society, and a huge amount of associations and institutions of many kinds, fighting for or against given interests. So that is, in the sense, the key. I mean, the press, without an active civil society, is, if not powerless, not that important. If it can play together with an active civil society, which it certainly can still in Norway, that helps at least a lot. So we have many discussions. I think that quite a few of these discussions are not that important. There are other more important matters that are not discussed. But I mean, this combination of media and civil society is the key in many ways, I would say.
So we continue. Milady, you now have the floor. Please remember to give your name. Nina Baronova from Nizhny Novgorod. My question is about juvenile justice. Recently in Norway, we have little material about Norway, but everywhere in printed media and on television, we have seen a great number of stories about juvenile justice, that Russian children from Russian families are being withdrawn from the families by the government officials. What is your take on this? Do you agree with what the Russian press claim? And the second question is, I don't know, what is it that Norwegian press says about Russia? Because what our journalists told about Norway today somehow makes it absolutely lose its prestige in the Russian eyes. Thank you. Dear colleagues, may I allow to clarify to my guest what the question is about?
Thank you for the question. In the sense, I expected the first one. I have read in Norwegian media that there has been a huge interest in Russia when it comes to these not governmental but municipal agents charged with the protection of childhood. I can, of course, not get into individual cases, first of all because I don't know them. And even if I knew them from the inside, I couldn't speak about child X or Y. But so I have to resume in a few sentences that the main impression that seems to have been created by the Ombudsman for Children in Russia is a wrong impression. It's a wrong impression. It's perfectly possible that some children of Russian parents or Russian mothers have been taken away from their family in Norway, but that happens to other people as well. The services have large prerogatives in the worst end. They will end. They will wait along. They will try other measures first. But large prerogatives in taking children away from the parents, if they really think that is needed. There's absolutely no need. There is absolutely no reason to believe that Russian children are taken more frequently away than children from other nationalities. But there may certainly be, and that we see from other kinds of immigrants as well, complaints in Norwegian media. There are certainly conflicts of culture, so to say, because I believe that services of this kind in Norway have stronger prerogatives towards everybody than those of many other societies, whereas many other societies tend to insist more or even more on the family. The children should stay in family, more or less whatever it costs. They may be more willing to take the child away from family in Norway. There have been problems with such affairs even in the European Human Rights Court in Strasbourg. As far as I know, never from Russian interests, but from a couple of other interests in the case. And then, there may be problems. First of all, maybe I should have said that the Norwegian services may have been mistaken on some points. That is, they are human beings. I know many examples of administrative services in Norway being mistaken, and that may be the case in some of these cases, I don't know. But if the point is that the children are taken away because they are Russians, that is, strictly speaking, pure nonsense. There's no reason to believe that. So, and I have no interest in protecting them, but try to understand what's going on. So I'm rather afraid that goes into some of the elements you talk about in the second question about you didn't use the word propaganda, but the way we look at each other. I started up saying that I'm very happy to be here for many reasons, including the idea that we should speak together, even more now than on a day-to-day basis in other better periods. What the Norwegian media says about Russia, it's a big question, of course. Just a few impressions. First of all, I think you should recall that for Norwegians, Russia has never been an enemy. If you go to Sweden, Russia has been the historical enemy, stealing St. Petersburg from Sweden and things like that at the time. You have all that part of the story, of course. Norway has never had such a story. To the contrary, the Red Army liberated part of Norway and went back. So that's very important, really, as even symbolically for our relationship. Second, many people go to Russia as tourists. There are a lot of commercial activities, notwithstanding the present boycott situation, which I dislike, but that's a fact. There are, up in the north, I mean, huge relations. I mean, there have been a kind of an automatic visa passing the border up in the north between Murmansk and Kirkenes, I mean, which functions very, very well. As far as I know, there have never been, I mean, transgressions, not for many years anyhow, from the Russian military side towards Norwegian territory and things like that. So things go smoothly. And the media will still tell a lot about daily life in Russia, and they happen to discover that Russians are normal people with some habitudes that are Russian and not Norwegian. So I think we really keep up that. At the same time, there is a lot of speaking about what is called authoritarian tendencies in the political field. Sometimes I tend to think they are not very well understood, but there are certainly points of that I tend to believe got something in them. And then I have seen recently, and that is really what I dislike, I mean, a tendency of reporting extensively about Russian airplanes or military vessels passing in the Atlantic on the Barents or whatever in the way that would not have been so scandalous, if you allow that question, some years ago, insisting on a kind of a military threat that I do not think exists at all. And the government doesn't think so, but still, I mean, this awareness of what's really happening is growing. And that's a shame. I mean, recently I saw one of the main papers telling about some submarines trying new rockets in the north of Murmansk, as if that was a new thing. I mean, where should they try them, so to say? That's in Russian waters. That's not a problem at all. But that was now talked about in the press in a way that would not have happened 3 years ago. So there is a bad tendency. But still, basically, I think Norwegian press is relatively balanced. Then one more point would be that Norwegian media, Norwegian public in general, uses English as the completely dominating foreign language, with exceptions of journalists, of course, and some people. And journalists, when they are taking in international information, they tend to take them from London or from the United States, and there you got a more one-sided picture. So little by little, that may even impregnate the Norwegian media. So I think the basic situation is not so bad, but there are some tendencies that I personally deeply dislike.
Я позволю себе добавить, коллеги, что...
May I add, my colleagues, that it seems to me that a certain role is played by a certain, what I would put it, different age of our democracies. Our fledgling democracy is younger somewhat, whereas Nordic democracies are somewhat older. That's why when a Russian child goes to the kindergarten and says that his mama pulled his tooth on her own, you know, this milk tooth, it makes a great impression on people who do not know how to do it on their own. Did they do it before? Of course they did, some 100 years ago. But at that time it was not considered some cruelty or something outrageous. But nowadays it immediately pulls in their mind, you know, scenes from Nazi Gestapo. A mother extracted a child's tooth, and all other teeth for that matter. So this alone... Yes, indeed, our speaker is right. It's a kind of cultural conflict, yes, first and foremost. And... can you advise something to Russian families who go there and get into this trouble? Yes, you can. Don't go away to Norway and Finland. If you insist on extracting teeth or slap them on the bottom, don't leave Russia. Here, kids are not withdrawn from families, not taken away from families. We continue. We'll have still several minutes to go.
But one point, I mean, I think the cultural differences are important. Different ways of thinking about how to behave with children. We moved a long way since 50 years ago as well in Norway. But we have examples of extremely bad treatment of children where the services did not intervene. One example I think about was an awful thing from Vestfold, where the young boy was beaten to death by the new husband of his mother, It was talked about that in the small society, but the agents did not intervene. They should have done so. We have a recent example coming from a Pakistani family in Oslo, where apparently a 9-year-old child, a boy, died. And the only reason it seems to be is that he had really been denied food. So he, 9 years and 20 kilos, things like that. They should have intervened much more early. When it comes to the Pakistani family, it is a possibility that they refrained a little bit because, people from other parts of the world, there you sometimes have even stronger differences in culture, and we have this awareness, talking a little bit about the Islamic terrorism, of don't touch too much because then you may be attacked as a racist or things like that, Pakistani, Somalis, but nobody thinks about Russians in Norway as a minority of that kind. You are apparently rather white or pink as I am. So you have not that reason for not intervening. So stay at home if you want to kick your child. That's maybe the best advice. Thank you.
Хорошо. Продолжаем. Сударыня, вам слово, прошу.
Okay, Milady, you have the floor. Darya Grineva from Moscow. You were saying that there exists inner freedom of expression in public sector, but sometimes we see this phenomenon that public servants more rather withhold the information, not only to the sort of external actors, but also within the organization, by using this as a means like inner resource within the organization, as a trade-in sort of resource. And sometimes it may influence decision-making and, in the long run, the information that is presented to the society. How often do you see it in Norway, if you do? And what are the mechanisms in place, maybe legal or public or social mechanisms of public control by the media or others who can prevent this inner situation? Because public servants are not here as a unified front. They also have differences.
There is a methodological problem in answering your question. If they withhold information, I tendenzially would not know. But I'm completely certain that may happen even in Norway. And you have the press department of every ministry or more or less every big public body, whose job is, of course, to present cases. But in order to present it, you have to filter, you have to select, and you could not be sure that the selection is completely neutral. You should rather distrust them, even if most of them do their job as good as they can. There is another aspect of this. This is what we talk about in some of our societies, about the obligation of the government to tell the truth to Parliament. When they present a bill, you should provide the Parliament with the facts or considerations that is needed for considering the bill. That is very much discussed in Norway, and there are examples where you could reasonably say that obligation to tell not only not to lie, but even to tell the whole truth, so to say, the counter arguments as well, has not completely been respected. I recently read an article from Denmark, which in many ways is close to Norway, where a public commission had interviewed a large amount of ministerial agents, and they had been quite open when saying that, it would rather be a professional mistake if you did not present the case in the way that was profitable to the minister. That's not good at all, but I'm sure that happens even in Norway.
Так, коллеги, 2 минуты у меня на часах.
Dear colleagues, we have 2 more minutes to go, as my watch tells me. I have also an announcement to make. And in consolation, I want to tell you two things. For those of you who did not have the time to speak up, yes, we'll have another Norwegian expert here. We'll have another Norwegian session for once. And secondly, problems of corruption will continue to be discussed at the next session by Yelena Panfilova. And that will be a very lively and even ardent conversation about corruption, I assure you, because I've known Lena for quite a while. So nowadays, I suggest that we should thank the expert who could provoke such a lively discussion. Let us thank our expert for this. Dear colleagues, in conclusion, I want to congratulate you on the day of the Constitution of the Russian Federation. I may remind you that the Constitution is now 21 years, and as you understand, we can do it all because it's fully of age now. Whereas usually they wish something to those people who have their birthday. We wish that it should be observed. So, dear comrades, congratulate you on a holiday. The meeting adjourns.